Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session, which is Strategic Leadership for Business Owners. It is very good to see you. Please let me know where you're at in the world and what kind of business that you're in. I want to make this relevant to you, and I want to make it as appropriate and applicable to you as possible. For those of you who are going to be joining me in the VIP session immediately afterwards, you can save your questions until then, or you can probably just type them all in here, and that way we can advance the conversation even further. If you are interested in joining us on the VIP session immediately following this call, we're probably not going to go right at 90 minutes. In fact, we're probably going to be a little bit shorter than that, but it is at 4:30 Eastern, and we'll be on there for up to 45 minutes. I'll be answering any questions that you have up to that period of time. And we're going to have some folks also join us from the school community who is a part of Strategic Boardroom. So it should be quite a few folks in there. I'm not sure exactly how many, because getting people to RSVP is always tricky. You business owners are a tricky bunch, but it's good to see you. So Jacqueline, hello, it's good to see you. If you are, let me put the fries in the bag on that. If you are interested in the VIP session at the end of this, like I said, it'll be at 4:30, so it'll be about 90 minutes from now. So if you like that, I will show you how to become part of that community, and you can join that call immediately afterwards if you're interested. So let's get to it. Hello, Jacqueline. It's good to see you. Please let me know where you're at and what kind of business that you're in. We'd love to make this very relevant to you. So a couple of quick things right out of the gate. I just wanted to say, okay, what is this even about? This whole strategic leadership concept, what is this even about? Why is this something that I should even matter with? Is the leadership really make that much of a difference in your business? Listen, by the end of this webinar, you're going to know exactly how to grow and scale your business by working less hours, not more hours. Does that sound interesting to you? And I know that's a big claim, but this is the secret sauce. This is it. And I have a lot of systems to put in place and lots of psychology, but when I'm looking at systems and psychology of a business, this is the psychological side of the business. And I'm telling you, if you want to grow and scale your business, you have to look at strategic leadership. Now, I'm going to talk about this here in depth. So let's get to it. So if you've got questions along the way, please type in your questions and I will answer them the best I can. I have some natural stopping points along the way. And like I mentioned in the very beginning, if you are interested in joining us for the VIP session immediately following, we do have several people who will be there, so who've already signed up for that. So if you are interested, I'll show you how to do that at the very end. So there's a couple of people that I'm going to be talking about and referencing in this entire session. One guy is Darwin Smith. It's likely a name that you have never heard of, but I can guarantee you, pretty much no matter where you live in the world, and I get quite a few people who are from all over the world here, and I get a lot of people who join me pretty much from abroad, either through Eventbrite or LinkedIn or YouTube. Darwin Smith's life touched you in some way or another through the products that he represents. So again, I can guarantee you, he was born in 1926, and he grew up in this little town, Garrett, Indiana, not too terribly far away from where I live here in Indiana. But it's about 30 minutes north of Fort Wayne, and simple guy, just liked to spend a lot of time on his backhoe, and he was the CEO of a company named Kimberly-Clark. Now, you may not know that name, but I guarantee you know their products. And at one point in time, they were the dominant, and I think they still are pretty high up there, the dominant paper provider, and realized that they needed to shift. Other names like, again, do we think of leaders when we think of people like John Wooden, who's a coach, who is another Indiana native, who is arguably one of the most effective leaders of all time, not just because he could win on the basketball court, but what he was doing to transform young men's lives. And in terms of what they became later in life, he was a true leader. So this is what we're going to be talking about. Even a guy named like Vince Lombardi, who he was very effective in American football and had 5 winning seasons, 3 of them back to back to back. So it was, and there were championship seasons, not just winning seasons, but championship seasons from starting in 1961 all the way through 1967. So he had a couple of years in there. They didn't win the Super Bowl. It wasn't called the Super Bowl back then, but again, very, very effective as a leader. So I've got Jacqueline is, you live in California, an online business. Excellent. Very good. So what we're going to be talking about here is a strategic approach to leadership. Now, as a strategist, I get hired in as a strategist, and sometimes I'm referred to as a fractional CSO. And generally, I like being called a fractional CSO because it pays a lot better. And sometimes I'm making upwards of $1,000 an hour. And this stuff that I'm going to be teaching you, I'm not saying that to brag or anything. I'm just saying that that is generally what I get paid to do this kind of work when I'm looking at organizations and I'm looking at their leadership. So you have to understand is that when I come into an organization and I work with executives with their strategic planning, or sometimes I'm out in the field with helping managers or supervisors be more effective as managers and as leaders. Sometimes I'm a trainer. Sometimes I'm a change agent. I'm helping them affect change in their organization, but I'm always helping them to establish priorities. And the main thing that's interesting about priorities, especially with business owners, is that they end up having these to-do lists of like 710 things they're going to try to get done today. Maybe not 710, but how about like 71 items that they're going to try to get done today, right? These lists, and this is the problem, is that when you, as a leader of the organization, when you have too many priorities, it has the same effect as having no priorities. And I'm going to be talking about this here in a little bit in terms of one of the main things that makes a leader so ineffective is they try to have so many priorities with not only on themselves, but with the organization and the people that they employ. It makes everyone ineffective. So one of the things about me, a couple things just really fast. I have written a number of business books. I started writing books in the leadership space, or I'm sorry, in the real estate space. Specifically, my first book was The Time Wealthy Investor. Then I wrote The Judge. Then I wrote The Time Wealthy Investor 2.0, which was it was the updated version of The Time Wealthy Investor. So that first book is out of print now. But then last year, I wrote my fourth book, which was The Time Wealthy Advantage. And that book is specific to building systems using the Viper methodology. We're not going to talk about the Viper framework or the Viper methodology today, but at the end of that book, that last chapter spoke specifically about leadership and management. And that is really what we're going to be talking about today, more leadership than management. But the leadership and the management is what runs on that system that you created. So you need more than just systems. I hear a lot of people out there go, oh yeah, it's systems and processes. That's great, but systems will only get you so far. Leadership is that intangible. It's really applying that secret sauce. If you think of the system like a battleship, well, a battleship isn't going to do much if it's just sitting in the harbor. It takes leadership to take that out of the harbor and go make some trouble somewhere. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And listen, at one point in time in my management business, my property management business, I had 12 people that I employed, and that is how I grew and scaled so quickly. Not because I had sales that were growing so fast, but because I employed so many people. And this is something that literally anyone can do. You don't necessarily need 12 people. You might only need 2 people. You might need 25 people, but that is how you're going to scale your business the fastest. We'll get into that here in just a little bit. So the main thing about this, let's face this, has anybody ever had or worked for a terrible boss? Has anybody, like, you might know who that person is. Now, don't throw anybody under the bus, but have you worked for that person where you're just like, oh my gosh, how in the world did you not get fired at this point? And really, you just kind of follow them out of morbid curiosity, not because of any clear leadership ability that they had. I had a few of those leaders like that in the Marine Corps. And I was like, how in the world did you not get like pushed off a bridge yet? Because they were just such ineffective leaders. Now that said, I also had the other side of the coin where I had some amazing leaders that I could learn from and truly understood why the the Marines under their command really were attracted to them, why they would literally do whatever they asked without question. So this is the sort of thing, and the things that I'm going to be talking about today, they are fundamental to everything that you're going to be doing as a strategic leader. Jacqueline says yes. Yeah, it's horrible, right? When you're thinking like, oh my gosh, I have to go back to that place tomorrow because of that individual that's working there. So these three things, and I'm just going to let you know that when you're working with a boss or someone, and keep in mind, this could be you, to be effective as a strategic leader, you have to have these three elements that I'm about to tell you right now. And I'm telling you, are there other elements of leadership that will make you effective? Absolutely. But if you're missing these three, I don't care what else you have. If you're missing these three, you will not be effective, and you probably won't even know why. So let's get into it. So the elements are trust, vision, and communication. And these three elements have to exist in totality. You cannot have a little bit of this and some of that, but you're really good here. All three of these work synergistically with one another. So this will make a little bit more sense here, but you understand as we get into the hierarchy of this, you got to understand how this actually works. Is this trust, vision, and communication? I was trying to figure out how to draw this as three legs of a stool, but I was like, you know what? They'll figure it out. They can impute this. But when you're looking at it from this aspect, trust, vision, and communication can work in any part of the organization, no matter the hierarchy. So whether you're at the top or somewhere in the middle or somewhere at the very bottom, if you have trust, vision, and communication, people will respond to you. You can be an effective strategist. You can be an effective strategic leader, and from no matter where you sit in the hierarchy of your organization. So if that's you as the business owner sitting in this hierarchy, that's great. Trust, vision, communication, that is going to make you an effective leader. If you're the guy all the way at the bottom and you come in, there will be room for you at the top as a strategic leader, because these strategic leaders are actually pretty rare because they don't think about these three things, these three main elements that have to exist. I am right now in a PhD program for organizational psychology, and I'm really very much at the beginning stages of my journey. So as I've gone through these studies and I have looked at all this stuff around leadership, we talk about leadership all the time. And every time I'm looking at these elements, that all these different traits that they talk about, and all the various components which make leaders effective, they keep coming back to these three: trust, vision, and communication. And the difference about being an effective leader is it's one person, you, working 80 hours a week. And you might be thinking, well, no one can do it better than me. Who said that? No, I have said that. Heck, if I had 3 hands, I'd put them all up right now, because I have said those exact words. Man, I hire all these people. No one can do it better than me. What's wrong with these people? I'm so much better than them, strutting around like I couldn't do anything wrong. Well, guess what? I'm the one who hired them. So yeah, I was the bottleneck in my organization, even though I was hiring other people to do work. But at the end of the day, I was like, well, I may as well do it myself. If they're not going to do it right, I may as well do it myself. Has anybody ever said that before? This is the crux of the problem with people who don't want to learn leadership. And this is why in my next book, we're almost there, which is called Leader Boss. The leader boss really doesn't understand how it's not just about handing over tasks that they really shouldn't be doing. It's also bringing that person up and leveraging their time. So rather than you as the leader boss of your organization working 80 hours a week, now you can spend just 8 hours a week managing people who work collectively 160 man hours per week. 160 man hours is, right, divided up by 4. That's 4 times 4, which is 40 hours, right? So how would you like to work 8 hours a week managing someone who overseeing 160 man hours per week? That's how you scale. That's the secret sauce right there. Do you understand? So many people, And so many business owners come to me and they want to grow and they want to scale. And what are they looking at? They're confusing scaling with sales. They think if they get more sales that they will scale. And there is a little bit of truth to that because you got to be able to pay these people in some way, right? But I'm telling you, like, if you're bringing the right people into the organization, especially lead generation people, which is a completely different webinar, by the way. But if you're bringing in people who can do lead generation for you, or you can bring in people who do some lead generation and some sales, that's how you grow. That's how you scale. By the way, growth and scaling is not the same thing. But that's when it's actually, when you're not trying to scale sales, you're actually scaling effort. That's the secret sauce. Does this make sense? So let's get into actually how to be effective as a strategist, as a strategic leader. Let's get into trust. Trust is that thing that everybody has to, you have to have that level of trust. Because the truth is, if people don't trust you, it doesn't matter what else you have to bring to the table. Again, I mentioned that Darwin Smith, who was the CEO of Kimberly-Clark, and he recognized when he sat at the helm. Now, keep in mind, this is back in the early 70s. And when he took the helm at Kimberly-Clark, he was not, I mean, people really didn't know him that well. I mean, they kind of trusted him, but he saw a company that was in a dying industry. They were in commodity paper, which means that basically bulk paper. And they had I think they had 12 different sawmills that would cut the trees down, and they had all this. They had like 300 acres of timberland, and all of this stuff that was representing an industry that was on its way down, and they had been steadily losing market share and profitability for many years. And it was Darwin Smith who kind of looked around and said, this is a disaster. I feel like we're on the deck of the Titanic and no one seems to be all that interested in changing their situation. So what he had to do was he had to recognize, first of all, before I make any major changes here, I have got to get these people's trust. And it was interesting, when to gain that level of trust with people, he would sit down and he would chat with them and he would just simply listen. And he knew how to elicit trust from people. He knew that listening rather than talking was a great way for him to develop and create trust with them. Here's a photo of me when I was in the Marine Corps. And this photo was me taken outside. We were in Cambodia. We had just landed there. We dropped off some people. They were looking for human remains and so forth. So we had dropped them off there in the C-130. And this is, I'm taking this photo because we had flown out of Thailand and dropped them off there, and we turned around and came back. Well, we were doing low-level flights, and if you look at this picture here, I had a 35 millimeter camera at the time, and I took this photo. Now, if you keep in mind, we're flying over. Now we were flying elevated above them. This is actually called a division flight, or we were section. So basically, they were the number 2 aircraft. They were the lead aircraft. So we weren't really doing anything except following them. But we came up and pulled alongside, and I snapped this photo. So they were probably about 300 or 400 feet above the ground when they had taken that shot. When I took that shot, and we're in a C-130. A C-130 is a pretty big airplane. I mean, it's, takeoff gross weight's like 120,000 pounds. And we're, zipping through the canyons, and northern Thailand is fairly mountainous. So we're yanking and banking and having a great time. But I mean, trust and know, you have to have your head on a swivel, and your situational awareness when you're the lead aircraft, it has to be absolute. Like I said, we were in the trailing aircraft, so we had a much lower standard. We were just actually kind of watching out for them. So when I was the lead navigator in the lead aircraft, they were following us. Do you think there's much trust that goes on between the navigator and the aircraft commander and the pilot and the load master and the flight engineer? Yeah, we're all operating at a high level of trust. And the interesting thing is that any one person, if they're feeling that they've lost situational awareness, they can call what's called a knock it off call, which basically wings level, and we broadcast knock it off, knock it off, knock it off, wings level, we go to 1,500 feet, we get it sorted out, right? This is training. We don't necessarily need to, lose our lives over something that's a training event. We need to stay safe too. But the thing is, this is the interesting thing. And I remember one time we were actually getting ready for this flight, and we were actually getting ready to fly out of, I think we were leaving Okinawa. That's where we were out of. And I went in to get the weather briefing for the flight. And I remembered a little sign. It was a little, kind of a printed sign that was sitting there for the weather guy. And it says, and he had this little phrase printed up. It says, "When I'm right, no one remembers. And when I'm wrong, no one forgets." And that's the lot of the weatherman, right? Well, that is so very true for leaders as well, isn't it? Right? Is that when you're right, no one remembers, and when you're wrong, no one forgets. And that was the standard that Darwin Smith was fighting against, because he had to be right, but he had to get everybody's buy-in along the way. So see, but first and foremost, before he could ever talk about vision, before he could ever, do anything else, he was being an effective communicator by just simply listening. We'll get to that here more in a second. But what he was doing was he was building trust. Now, when it comes to trust, there are two standards of trust. Again, this is something anybody can do. This is something you can definitely do. But you have to understand the differences in trust. There is predictive trust, and there is vulnerability-based trust. Okay? Predictive trust is a much lower standard than vulnerability-based trust. Okay? Think about predictive trust being like, well, yeah, that employee, he shows up, on time. He does his job. Yeah, he's predictable, right? That's predictive trust. Vulnerability-based trust is a significantly higher standard of trust. Think about it. For those of you who, and usually there's a few people in the crowd that can relate to this, is that, do you ever have like those family gatherings where, anything that you say can and will be used against you on social media? So you choose not to say very much, right? So that's where, or whatever you say can and will be used against you when you're not around. So that's the same type of thing when it comes to vulnerability-based trust. Or again, if you're working in an organization where there's very low trust, a low trust environment, is that, anything you say can and will be used against you in the break room, right? That's the sort of thing. So vulnerability-based trust is a much higher standard of trust. And to think about this is like, okay, you might trust someone to let your dog out on vacation, but you can't trust them to pick up your kids on time at daycare, right? So that's the difference between predictive trust and vulnerability-based trust. And someone hollered up one time, like, well, I trust more with my kids than I do with my dogs, right? Because, right, it's a different standard of trust, okay? But the thing is, when you're looking at operating within a low trust environment, I promise you, every person on here has worked in this situation. Please let me know if this sounds familiar. This is when you're working in a low trust environment, everything is slower and everything is suspect, right? Everything is going to like, oh, why did you say that word in that way? Okay. So basically when you're not around, everything's going to be used against you, right? Or just everything takes forever because you've got to have 9 different bosses say yes to something that should be just an easy yes for one person or for that own individual. But because you have to run it up the chain and get approval on approval on approval on approval, and then by the time it gets back, it's, even the opportunity has left, the opportunity no longer exists. So this is where you have to start to think about this in terms of change management. And change management, this is something when I first heard this concept, I was like, oh gosh, it's one of those, fancy, things that people come up with, these phrases that people come up with in academia who've never had to hire anybody, who've never had to fire anybody, who've never had to cut people's pay, who've never had to, never really struggled much in the actual employment sector. But truly, change management it's very real. And the fact of managing change, listen, if you're looking to grow or scale your organization, it by virtue has to change. And because growth requires change, growth necessitates change, leadership is what manages that change. So that's why leadership, especially from this from this one narrow aspect of trust, is so incredibly critical. Effective strategic leaders recognize that not everyone has the same relationship with change. And if you, as the leader, have a bad relationship with change, you're probably going to have to get over that, or you're probably going to have to step aside and let someone else lead. Because the truth is this, and I could not believe this. I couldn't believe it when I first heard it. And then as I thought about it, I was actually surprised this was so low. But 70% of change attempts fail. So anytime something tries to get rolled out, it doesn't roll out effectively. And when I look at that from a small business perspective, and I tend to work with a lot of small business owners, I got thinking about it. I'm thinking, I'll bet you that number is closer to 90%. If they've got less than 50 employees, I'll bet you it's closer to 90%, because they don't have the resources for effective change like larger organizations would. And here's the truth. And this may be also true for you as the leader, but for many, the discomfort of suffering is more tolerable than the discomfort of change. And I work with many business owners, and there's a couple of folks, I'm not going to mention them by name, but they really struggle with change. And the reason why they didn't want to change is because they were afraid of what the unknown was. They were much more easy. It was much easier for them to tolerate the suffering they were going through because they knew the suffering. What they didn't want to get into was the unknown. And that was why a lot of people stay stuck, because they're more willing to suffer than to change. They stay in stasis. They stay right where they're at. They stay stuck. So Darwin Smith, when he recognized that he was in a dying industry, and keep in mind, these mills that they had is what brought Kimberly-Clark to where it was for the last 100 years. These paper mills, which were the foundational legacy of the company, they were becoming a millstone around their necks. And Smith knew he had to change the direction of the company, but like I said, he had to get their trust first. So that's when you're starting to think about this. That's when you have to recognize that when you have that high level of trust, and he was going out and he was having these conversations and he was talking with them and he was saying, hey, look, this is, we cannot move forward the way we are unless we create this trust. So Becky is saying, oh, okay, sorry, you're in Michigan, you run a homeless shelter. Very good, Becky, thank you. And thanks for the work you're doing. Thank you. And welcome. So it's in the environment of trust where which enables change to occur. So even though I said all the trust, vision, and communication have to be there, if you're trying to grow in an environment where there's no trust, I would say work on trust first and foremost. And you do that by demonstrating vulnerability. You do that by demonstration, not just saying, well, you need to trust each other. That doesn't do anything. Demonstrate some vulnerability. Demonstrate something that could actually be used against you if it were to go sideways. That's true vulnerability. Put yourself right up there where you can get injured just like the frontline troops, right? Show them and demonstrate to them that you're willing to do what is necessary. Of course, morally, ethically, and responsibly, of course, right? But effective strategic leaders, here's what here's the role that they take, is that first and foremost, they have to define why. Why do we need to change? Well, this was the problem. He recognized, again, like I said, they've been having a declining stock share, a price per share for a while. And they were into a declining industry because there was more competition coming in that were doing commodity paper. They couldn't compete. They just couldn't. So then, once the why has been defined by the leader, then you explain why. Okay, so you define the why. Hey, we really need to change because of this problem. Okay, and then explain why. Well, here's the problem that I'm seeing. We've got these competitors. We've got this. We've got foreign paper coming in. We've got, they've got lower costs. We can't compete, right? And then after that, you ask for their input. And that is going to really ramp up your ability to create trust with the people in your organization. So when Darwin Smith recognized the need for change, that they were in a dying industry, that where they were, what got them to where they were was not going to be the future, he had to define the why. Now it was up to him to tell them specifically, okay, here's what's going on. And that is where we start to come up with vision. Now, when it comes to vision, again, this is the main component of vision. So let's put trust. Let's say that we've built that trust, and you now are starting to have this vision. Now, this is something, again, effective change management involves asking them for input. And once you have that input, here's a word I want you to put in your vernacular. You have to enroll them into this new vision for the future. And Darwin Smith understood that history was not the same as legacy, because history is what they were. Legacy is what you're going to be, and the real change in society. And what Darwin Smith saw as the future was not commodity paper, but consumables. And what am I talking about? You couldn't get any different with what Darwin Smith was proposing. What he was proposing was not to go down more of the paper route. What he was proposing is to let's look at what the consumables are, and of all things, it was disposable diapers. And you might be thinking, wait, what? It had nothing to do with that. And you know who owned the space in that time? Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. And Kimberly-Clark, yeah, they were a publicly traded company, but they were not. I mean, this was truly David taking on Goliath. And just to highlight how different this is, what a change this would be for Kimberly-Clark and the organization, this would be like if Boeing decided to start producing ice cream machines instead of airplanes. That's what I'm talking about. It's that big of a change. Or instead of General Motors making automobiles, that they decided to make copiers. That's the type of change that I'm talking about. Like, we're a complete different rebrand and just retooling of the organization. So this is why I'm saying to have that shared vision is to sit down vis-a-vis with Jacqueline or Becky and say, hey, or Joe, and say, hey, tell me what your thoughts are. I really need your input. And well, I appreciate, we can't probably do it exactly the way you said it, but we are going to have to shift directions, and this is what it's going to take. Now, keep in mind, this was a big, big undertaking. So what was that going to take? Well, this is when the communication piece comes into play. So you have their trust. You've created a shared vision, not a vision that's yours, like Moses coming down off the mountain and telling him what it all is. Hey, here's the vision for the organization, but it's a shared vision. And keep in mind, he had a board of directors to respond to as well. So when you're communicating, this is where you have to start and recognize that as a leader, communication comes in all forms. And in today's world, it's not just verbally communicating, but it's also communicating in email, and it's also communicating often. Are you doing it often enough? And are you having the right type of communication where it's not just a megaphone, but it's a telephone, where you're not just always bloviating out, but you're listening back. And that is the main difference in communication. So this is where I hear, again, I mentioned this earlier about priorities with leadership, but having too many priorities has the same impact as having none. And if you're trying to communicate too many priorities, and I hear this a great deal with small business owners, that if you have too many priorities, you're really being confusing to the people in your organization. So once Darwin Smith had their trust, and then he had this shared vision to pivot the organization and take on head-to-head Procter and Gamble, the 800-pound gorilla in the consumer space, I mean, trust and know they were up for a fight, because Procter and Gamble was not about to give up market share without a fight. So here's what ends up happening is that once he established those priorities, now he had to back them up. And the priorities were going to be like, okay, well, if this is going to be a priorities, then we're going to need, we have to back this up, and we have to support our people. And this is the thing that I see all the time with leaders and managers, especially just bad managers or bad bosses. When they say something is a priority and they don't give someone else a resource to back it up. You cannot establish something as a priority unless you're willing to attach a resource to it. Let me say that again. You cannot say something is a priority to your people if you're not willing to attach a resource to it. What do I mean by a resource? I'm talking time, money, or people, or a combination of all three things. So when you're looking at this, and you're looking at these priorities, have you ever been asked to do something and or hey, yeah, you need to make sure that this is a priority? Okay, great. Am I taking time? Where am I taking the time from? Oh, no, it's only part of expected, just get it done. Okay, so right, do you see these competing priorities? I can tell you, you don't even have to answer the question. I know that you had to deal with something like this. Absolutely. And this is where it gets really, really frustrating with people who are giving you lots of orders and barking and creating lots of demands and making lots of demands for you, but they're really not, they're not giving you the proper resources. And keep in mind, it's not just always about the time to do it, or the people to do it. And I say money, but I'm also talking about like some sort of asset. Maybe it's a computer program you need to purchase. Maybe it's a vehicle. Maybe it's a piece of equipment, whatever it is. But this is how you know that something is truly a priority. Okay. So, there's that. So when we're coming to this strategic leadership, there's a couple of things that I just want to highlight here. And if you got any questions, go ahead and type the questions in here and I'll go ahead and answer them. But the trust is absolutely foundational. And vision involves enrolling others and understanding that vision is not the same thing as destiny. And this is the interesting thing, is that if you have people who trust you, but they do not share in your vision, okay? And you might be an effective communicator. So you have their trust. You are an amazing communicator, but there's no shared vision. They're not going to follow you. They will follow you maybe, but I'm telling you, like, especially today's folks, to the younger worker, the millennial, they want to feel like they're accomplishing something towards a bigger end, which is pretty cool if you think about it. But you've got to have that shared vision already in place. You cannot just say, well, just keep rowing until I get tired. They're not going to do that. They're going to leave. They're going to go and work for someplace more meaningful. If, for example, you have their trust and you even could have a shared vision, but you're a horrible communicator, or you don't communicate often enough, or you don't really say what you mean, or you play the blame game, or it's like typing in all caps all the time. These are the sorts of things that really make people ineffective in their leadership. And unfortunately, people just don't understand it. They won't know why people aren't following them. Yeah, because you're not an effective communicator. And I'm just saying, are there other aspects of this that are really important? Absolutely. What if you had their trust, that you didn't have their trust, but you were excellent, you had a very clear vision for the future, and you were an absolutely amazing communicator. You had a silver tongue, but they didn't trust you. And when you're looking at that trust and these different 7 elements of trust around, and I'm not going to get into the elements of trust, but there's 7 different elements of trust, but those 2 main elements of trust are based around competence and character. Competence and character. And this is something that I teach in my marketing sessions. It's something I teach in my sales sessions. And in the leadership, it's also really critically important. But the character and the competence, if you're trying, the fastest way to build trust with someone in a selling situation is to demonstrate competence. Demonstrate that you know what you're talking about. If you don't know what you're talking about, it's going to come up pretty quickly and they're not going to trust you. If you're demonstrating a lack of character, and this is universal between a marketer, a salesperson, or a leader, but if you're trying to demonstrate, if you start to demonstrate bad character, like if I mentioned, oh yeah, well, I've got an awesome ride at home, but I got to hurry up because I got a date with my girlfriend, and you're like, dude, what do you have a girlfriend and a wife? Like, that's, what? Right? It won't matter what I know. It won't matter the level of competence that I have. You're not going to trust me because I've already demonstrated a lack of character. Think about this. When a witness is on the stand, what does the counter attorney, what do? That went under cross-examination. They attack the character. When a politician is going after their opponent, what do they attack? They don't attack their policies. They attack their character. Yeah, the policies might make some headway for some people, but when they attack their character, it's much more effective. And that is what unfortunately dismantles that leadership. Okay. So this is everything I have. So if you guys have any questions, you guys can type in some questions. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about the strategic boardroom session that I have. If you guys are interested, and again, it was a little shorter than I was expecting, but they usually get lots of questions. That's okay though. I baked it in the cake for here. But in the bottom of the hour, so at 4:30, I have a session where if you guys want to chat about this or anything at all related to business, I have a school community based on Strategic Boardroom, and you can go to this site right here, which is Strategic Boardroom. School.com/strategic boardroom. And you can sign up there. And we have sessions like this there that are training sessions all the time. So yeah, you can go and sign up there. And depending on what you want, if you're looking for different types of training, if you're looking for, the main things that I do is between lead generation, sales, operations, and accounting, and we look at these different things. But if you're looking for a community of like-minded individuals to be a part of, you guys can join us there at school.com/strategic boardroom. So we got a question here. Becky, what would you do if you received a promotion and now are to lead someone that you were a coworker with, and they think they should have had the position? We run into this happens a lot, actually. This person is having an extreme emotional reaction. This happens a great deal, and I'm glad you brought this up. This happens a lot pretty much in any organization. We see this a lot also in the Marine Corps so I only spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, but the problem here is obviously if they felt that they should have the position, they obviously felt that they were better suited for the promotion or whatever else it is. A lot of times it's best, in my opinion, to look at these three pillars: trust, vision, communication. If they felt like they deserved that promotion, a lot of times it's probably best to get it out in front and get that out, get that communication, that line of communication going. Now, whether they were truly suited for the position or not, who knows? And of course, there's office politics and everything that plays into that. But usually that's probably not, depending on the relationship that you have with this individual. I don't know if you have a high trust relationship with this individual or not. If you don't and are not operating in a position of high trust, and you're operating in actual low trust or even distrust, and keep in mind, distrust can coexist with trust in different elements. So just keep in mind that they don't actually operate. Distrust is not a different end of the same spectrum. It's a completely different phenomenon. But what I would say is, if you're operating in an area of distrust or even low trust with this individual, my suggestion is probably to work with someone else to help bridge that gap, because you may not be able to do that on your own. That person might just be emotionally compromised, that they're not going to see this any other way other than you have what they wanted. You have what they deserve. So my suggestion would be to work with someone else, and that may not be your boss. That might actually take someone else, generally from outside the organization, to help with this. So, and that's where like a coach or a strategist or a change manager or someone like that can come in and help bridge that gap. And this happens all the time, by the way. This is not unusual. So if they're feeling salty about it because they felt like they deserve the promotion and you're now their boss, so that would be one side of that equation. If, however, you do have some trust with that individual, then you can say, hey, look, then you can have the actual conversation and say, look, I know where you're coming from. I know where you're feeling, and I don't know the specifics of it, so I don't want to give you bad advice. But what I'm saying here is that it really hinges on how much trust you have between one another. And if it's a higher trust environment or higher trust between the two of you, you can have that conversation. If it's lower trust, then chances are you probably need someone else. My guess is that if it's lower trust, which it probably is, they also have some lower trust now with the organization, and they're probably going to leave, if I had to guess. So who knows? That would be my suggestion, though, is work with them around building that trust. There's a whole host of ways that you can do that, generally by demonstrating some vulnerability, generally just by getting to know them a little bit better. Chances are if you work with this person, you know them quite well, but unfortunately, building and repairing that trust can sometimes some people just don't want to, they want to be mad about it. They don't want to move forward. They want to be mad. And that's unfortunate when you have that situation. So, Becky says, we used to have trust as we were friends because we were a small organization. We are expanding now. Yep, I get that. And that's where I'm saying the unfortunate thing about this, Becky, is that if you are an expanding organization, many times the people that are in the organization, they have to change or their names have to change. Meaning it's not going to be the same person at that desk. And that's tough. And many times people who start out in the organization at the beginning are very, very seldom the people near the end, just because there's so much change has to go on that's like, oh, I loved it in the old days when ... And that's great, but that's who we were. That's not who we are. And unfortunately, that's where that takes an effective person who can help with change management and organizational development. So it sucks. I know this, and I've been there back when I had my first couple of employees, and when I grew to, even I went from 2 to 8, I had those 2 that were in the beginning, they had to go. And unfortunately, it's tricky. It's just one of those things that you just have to recognize that the people of tomorrow were probably not going to be the people that you have today. So Nee says, Ohio non-medical home care. Excellent. Very good. Thank you for joining us today, Nee. And then we have, what is the name of your book? Where can it be purchased at? Oh, Jacqueline, it's so this book over my shoulder, grab it here, is The Time Wealthy Advantage. Okay, that's The Time Wealthy Advantage. You can purchase it off of Amazon if you like. If you are in the United States, however, and you would like to get a signed copy of The Time Wealthy Advantage, you can go to strategicboardroom.com, which I never put the banner up today. I forgot about that. Maybe made it nice and pretty. So if you go to strategicboardroom.com, and right on the main page, you can purchase a copy of the book, and there's some other stuff in there too that if you like, and there's some bonuses in there you can purchase too if you'd like them. But you can get that, and I can sign it and send it out to you if you are interested. So thank you. Thanks for your interest on that. Oh, hold on a second. Thank you, Jacqueline. Becky says, thank you for your feedback. Yeah, I wish I had an easier answer for you. But more than likely that's just part of growing pains. It's just the way it goes, unfortunately. All right. So I don't have any other questions. Thanks so much for sticking around. If you guys would like to be part of the training session or the conversation in about 40 minutes, be at the bottom of the hour, just go ahead and head over to the link that's on the screen. You can go to there. And I do get some questions about what the different levels are, and I don't have quite the video. The school community is actually still pretty new for me, but there's three different levels. The $549 is where you get me, and that's pretty much you get me unlimited. So you get a lot of one-to-one coaching with me for people who are really ready to kind of rock and roll and like ready to go very fast in their change and where they're at and really need my deep level strategy work. That is the level that probably works best for them. For those people who just would like to have someone that they could chat with once a month, I have a middle level that's 119, and then the bottom level, if you're just wanting the group training, you just want to be involved in group calls, just like very much like this, then you can sign up for the $39 one. For many people though, I'm just letting you know that $39 one, it's really just I made that level really just so people can be involved in the community, because I didn't want to isolate people because they couldn't afford the one-to-one training. And not everybody's ready for that, so I totally respect that. But that's why I made that bottom level there. All right, so that is all I have, everybody. Thank you so much for sticking around, and I'll see you guys in the boardroom. Take good care.